Some of you might remember that we have a tradition of a Brown Brothers Bible Conference, and each year my brothers, myself, and Pastor Stephen rotate among our churches to go to different churches and share a week of meetings on a topic or a passage that the host pastor chooses. And so we've had the Brown Brothers Conference here twice. It's been at Parsippany twice. It's been at Grace Baptist in Ulster, Pennsylvania once, and I think once or maybe twice at my brother Mark's church in Elmira, New York. And last year we chatted with our brother-in-law, Howard Cole, over in Augusta, Maine, and said, hey, would you like to have the Brown Brothers over your place? And his church is a little older congregation, a little smaller. But he said, I would like that. That would be a lot of fun. So we said, okay, Howard, what do you want us to preach on? We like Philippians, we like joy, we like heaven, we like, these kind of things are a lot of fun to preach. And he says, I've never in my life heard a conference on Ezekiel. How about if you guys preach on Ezekiel? And we said, Howard, are you crazy? Nobody does a conference on Ezekiel. You don't do that. It's a hard book. There's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't make any sense. And you want us to come preach on Ezekiel? Yeah, I'd like that. Okay, Howard. You know what? It turned out to be an amazing conference. It was just wonderful. There are a lot of hard things because the time period that is being addressed in the book of Ezekiel is during the second exile of the Jews, 593 BC, and all the way through the downfall of Jerusalem and on into the third exile of the Jews leaving Jerusalem under force and being brought to Babylon. And the reasons for the exile are sin. And so Ezekiel has a lot in it about the sin of God's people. There are parts of it that are doom. God says, I am sick and tired of your sin. There are also places that are so amazing that you just want to jump up and down. And we have 9 messages planned. It's a long book. So by no means are we covering the entire book. That's not going to happen. But we have 9 messages planned for the next several weeks, and we'll be looking at this book of Ezekiel and kind of a cross-section. So this is not a thorough study, but it's kind of a cross-section of what is going on in the book of Ezekiel. So tonight, we're looking at just chapter 1 of Ezekiel. You can see that there is a time marker in the first 3 verses. Here's what is written. Now it came about in the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, while I was by the river Chebar among the exiles, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th of the month, in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's exile, the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans, by the river Chebar, and there the hand of the Lord came upon him. So Ezekiel gives us some dates. Now, in those days, you didn't write down January 21st, 2018. You didn't do that. What you did is you tied what you wanted to record to the date of a king. And we can find that in verse 2, the 5th month, in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's exile. And so we can be pretty exact, we can be pretty detailed with our analysis of when this is, what is the date. And it's probably late June of 593 BC. This would be 5 years after King Nebuchadnezzar had come back to Jerusalem after a rebellion of the Jews and had exported several thousand more Jews. This happened actually 12 years before that. There's 2 exiles now that have happened, And Ezekiel seems to have been in the second one of them. And it happened 5 years before this is written, 593 BC. There are several thousand Jews now in Babylon, and there is a settlement of Jews on what's being called here the River Chebar. The River Chebar is an irrigation canal that diverts water from the Euphrates River into farmland. And the Jews have apparently relatively fertile fields. They have some freedom of movement. They're able to have their own houses and property, and they're farming. But they're in exile. They do not belong there. They belong back in Israel, back in Jerusalem, but they're living in Babylon. And Ezekiel has been among these exiles now for 5 years, and his ministry is going to be largely to these exiles. In the last 12 years, since before this was written, the Jewish world has been turned upside down because the Jews had long thought, and they actually still think, that God will never allow the Jewish nation to be completely and totally eradicated. He will never allow his temple to be desecrated. He simply won't do that. It's the temple of God. It's the temple of Jehovah. He is not going to allow that to happen. And many, many Jews thought, even though this exile has been going on 5 years for Ezekiel, 12 years for many others, many, many people think it's going to end any time. Any day now, we're going to go back to the land. What they don't know is that in 7 more years, there's going to be a rebellion back in Jerusalem. And this time, Nebuchadnezzar, you know that name, Nebuchadnezzar, is going to march to Jerusalem, and he's going to say, enough is enough. I'm not messing around anymore. I've come here twice before, and I was nice. I'm not nice now. And in 586 BC, the city of Jerusalem will be utterly destroyed. Buildings and houses will be razed to the ground. Tens of thousands of people will be slaughtered. Many, many thousands of Jews will starve to death. And the temple of God, this beautiful, glorious building built by Solomon 300 years earlier, will be knocked down block by block until nothing is left. And Jews will be driven screaming out of the city. And hundreds of thousands of Jews will start the long journey with nothing but a bag of clothes or a box of special possessions or nothing, walking and walking and walking for 1,000 miles to Babylon. That is 7 years in the future, and that crisis is on the way. It's on the horizon. Ezekiel doesn't know fully, but he actually is going to be one of the messengers of God that God is going to use to tell the Jewish people, listen up. This is all coming because of your idolatry. This is coming because of your negligence of Jehovah. This is coming because you have sinned and you will not come back to me. Now, with this kind of a crisis, with this kind of an existential threat just over the horizon, what would you expect would be proper preparation? Well, build the walls. Fortify the walls. Get the walls bigger and thicker and taller and stronger. Make swords. Make as many swords as you can make. Get the spears ready. Get the arrows and the bows. And maybe somebody should learn some Babylonian. Hire some grief counselors. You're going to need it. But in Ezekiel chapter 1, what we discover is what is the most critical thing to get ready for an existential threat, to get ready for this incredible crisis that is coming over the horizon, is a proper view of God. To fix how you think about God. To work in your head and have you understand who is God, what is He, what does He do? And Ezekiel chapter 1 is exactly that. It is a vision of the glory and the power of God, because that is more important than swords or spears or any other kind of preparation. So Ezekiel is going to record for us this vision that he has had, and it is really amazing. In verse 4, we'll see the storm cloud. In verses 5 through 14, we're going to see the living beings. In verses 15 through 21, he's going to describe the wheels. There are wheels beside the cherubim. There's a platform over their heads in verses 22 through 25. And then finally, at the end of the chapter, 26 through 28, he begins talking about the one on the throne. There's a platform and a throne on the platform, and there's somebody on the throne. One of the things that shows up in Ezekiel 1 is a certain kind of language. And we run across this in other places where books of the Bible take on a certain tone or have kind of an attitude or a certain tone of voice, you might say. So, for example, in Psalm 139, David starts out by being a little bit resentful about God's sovereignty and his omnipresence. He says, where can I go to hide from you? I don't like the fact that wherever I go, you're already there. And in the middle of that psalm, he kind of turns the corner and begins to praise God, to think right about it. Or in the book of Revelation, you find that John the elder has kind of a breathless quality as he tries to describe what he's seeing in heaven and the great plan of God for the future. He uses the word "and." It's kind of like he can't quite catch his breath with everything, the speed and the power of the vision that he's seeing. He's talking about this, and then he's and this, and this, and this, and this. And in Ezekiel chapter 1, the language is very interesting. What shows up a lot is, take a look at, for example, in verse 4, as I looked, behold, a storm wind was coming from the north, a great cloud of fire flashing forth continually and a bright light around it, and in its midst something like glowing metal in the midst of the fire. Something like, in verse 5, notice that it says this was their appearance. And in verse 7, their legs gleamed like burnished bronze. The word like or resembling or appearance shows up close to 30 times in this chapter. And the effect of this is it's as if Ezekiel is trying to convey concepts and images and pictures that don't quite fit into human language. The concepts, the ideas, the glory is too big. It's almost as if, imagine what would happen if somebody handed you a blob of lava out of a volcano. You know, it's 4,000 degrees. He says, here, take this. Oh, wait a minute, let me get a container. Well, you pull out a plastic pitcher. Well, that won't work. Wait, let me get a glass container. Well, it'll melt the glass. A steel pot. Well, it'll burn right through that. You don't have anything that can hold it. And Ezekiel is trying to use human language to convey ideas, concepts, images that are too big for it. So we find over and over again, it resembled this, it looked like this, its appearance was like this, over and over again. So let me read for you out of Ezekiel chapter 1. And then we'll talk about some of the component parts of this, and then finally talk about, so what does it mean? What do we do with this? And I'm going to start in verse 4. As I looked, behold, a storm wind was coming from the north, a great cloud with fire flashing forth continually, and a bright light around it, and in its midst something like glowing metal in the midst of the fire. Within it there were figures resembling 4 living beings, and this was their appearance. They had human form. Each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and their feet were like a calf's hoof, and they gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings on their 4 sides were human hands. As for the faces and wings of the 4 of them, their wings touched one another. Their faces did not turn when they moved. Each went straight forward. As for the form of their faces, each had the face of a man. All 4 had the face of a lion on the right, and the face of a bull on the left, and all 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each had 2 touching another being, and 2 covering their bodies. And each went straight forward. Wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go without turning as they went. In the midst of the living beings, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches darting back and forth among the living beings. The fire was bright, and lightning was flashing from the fire. And the living beings ran to and fro like bolts of lightning. Now as I looked at the living beings, behold, there was one wheel on the earth beside the living beings for each of the 4 of them. The appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like sparkling beryl, and all 4 of them had the same form, their appearance and workmanship being as if one wheel were within another. Whenever they moved in any of their 4 directions without turning as they moved. As for their rims, they were lofty and awesome, and the rims of all 4 of them were full of eyes round about. Whenever the living beings moved, the wheels moved with them. And whenever the living beings rose from the earth, the wheels rose also. Wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go in that direction, and the wheels rose close beside them, for the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. Whenever those went, these went. And whenever those stood still, these stood still. And whenever those rose from the earth, the wheels rose close beside them, for the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. Now over the heads of the living beings there is something like an expanse, like the awesome gleam of crystal spread out over their heads. Under the expanse their wings were stretched out straight, one toward the other. Each one also had 2 wings covering its body on the one side and on the other. I also heard the sound of their wings like the sound of abundant waters as they went, like the voice of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army camp. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. Now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli in appearance. And on that which resembled a throne high up was a figure with the appearance of a man. Then I noticed from the appearance of his loins and upward something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins and downward I saw something like fire, and there was a radiance around him. As the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. Wow. That's quite something, isn't it? I mean, how do you process that? Well, let's walk through it a little bit and discuss it just a little bit. So we've got a storm wind coming out of the north, and Ezekiel is near this irrigation canal in Babylon. He looks north, and he sees apparently clouds and some atmospheric disturbance. That means a wind is coming out of there, and sweeping down towards him. And in the middle of this cloud, this wind, this storm, we've got a bright light, fire flashing around, and a bright light around it. And in its middle is something that looks like glowing metal. So this is like a storm like you've never seen before. This is not just a lightning storm, but there's something that looks like glowing metal inside of a cloud as it's approaching. And then he gets a look, verse 5, and he begins to describe what he sees inside this storm cloud, inside this wind. And we find out that there are 4 living creatures, 4 living beings. So these are sentient beings. These are not forces of nature. They're not animals. They are intelligent beings, and they're humanoid. That they're generally human in appearance. They don't look like animals. They don't look like crickets. They don't look like birds. But as you find out how they're described, these are not human beings. These are something other than human. So we find out they're humanoid, they're human in appearance, verse 5. But in verse 6 we find out they have 4 faces. Well, we're no longer in the realm that we understand. Now, you should know that there are people who have, and Christians even, who have read Ezekiel chapter 1 and have said this: I think Ezekiel is insane. I think he's on drugs or something. No, Ezekiel is not insane and is not on drugs. He is describing actual living beings. These are actual, real, existing creatures. Just because you have not seen anything like this does not mean they don't exist. And in fact, the dividing line between our comfortable world in which we think we know everything, we think we understand what goes on all around us. We touch things and we know, we understand. I tell you what, just the other side of a very thin dividing line, there is a whole world of the unseen realm that we don't know much about. All we know about is what the Bible tells us. But we've discussed this before, we've studied it before. In this room right now, there is strong evidence from the Bible that the people you see around us are not the only ones here. There are, we believe, we feel pretty confident, angels right here in this room. How can I touch them? How come I can't see them? Well, I don't know. I have theories about that. I think that their bodies may resonate at a different frequency. And our senses, our eyes, our ears, our sensory organs are not equipped to handle the dimension or the frequency in which they exist. But they're just as real as we are. They're not human, but they're real. These creatures are real creatures, but they're not human. You never saw a human with 4 faces and 4 wings. Verse 7, they have straight legs. They have unjointed legs. And verse 8, under their wings and their 4 sides are human hands. So they do have arms and hands. They also have wings. And their wings touch each other. Now, in verse 9, we're introduced to something that's very unique about these creatures. They never arc. They never curve. So you and I are capable of moving in circles. We can move around and turn like this. These creatures never do that. They always go in straight lines and right angles. So you can see their human face is facing one direction. They go that direction, and then they stop, and then they turn and go in the direction of the lion face. So they can get to any point on a grid, but they do so not by curving, not by arcing, but in straight lines. They apparently also move in 3 dimensions because it talks later on about the wheel moves off the earth. They go up and down. So they can get to any point in a 3-dimensional grid in straight lines. Notice in verse 10 we have the description of their faces: man, lion, bull, and eagle. There's more we could say about that, but we're going to hurry along. Verse 11, their wings are spread out above, 2 touching another being, 2 covering their bodies. We find out later on their wings make a noise when they move. In verse 12, they go straight forward. Wherever the Spirit is about to go, they go without turning as they went. In the midst of the living beings, now it's unclear in verse 13, does this mean the 4 of them are together as if they are a living chariot? So we're describing something like a chariot made up of cherubim. We find out later on these are cherubim. And is this glowing, verse 13, like burning coals of fire, like torches darting back and forth among the living beings? Is it kind of inside the circle of the 4 of them? Maybe. Another possibility is that it's actually inside their bodies. And you can see something in their chest moving around. And it looks like torches or fire. Well, we've left the realm of humanity a while ago. That this is not human. These are angels. These are cherubim. They ran to and fro, verse 14, like bolts. Apparently they move fast. There's speed involved, like bolts of lightning. Now in verse 15, Ezekiel begins to describe the wheels. And this is, if you weren't freaked out a minute ago, you are now. Because next to each one of these angelic creatures is a wheel, and the dimension of this, he doesn't give us distance measurements like it's 15 yards high, but it says, verse 18, their rims are lofty and awesome. So the picture you get is of gigantic wheels, huge wheels. And they are right next to the angel, right next to the cherubim. And when they go up in the air, the wheels go up. When they move forward, they dart forward. These wheels are part of them. That is part of their being, apparently. In fact, the way it's described, this is maybe one of the most strange things in the whole description. Verse 18, the rims of all 4 of them were full of eyes round about. Wow. This is like, nightmare fodder. This is like, if you wake up in the middle of the night with this running through your head, you say, I will never again order that kind of pizza. This is beyond strange. It is like hallucinating, that's exactly right, but this is real. Furthermore, we find out in verses 19, 20, 21, Ezekiel says the spirit of the living beings is in the wheels, that the wheels are alive. They're somehow a part of, they're an expression of, they're manifestations of these angelic beings. I won't take it there because of time, but in chapter 10, in verse 1, these beings are called cherubim. So we know for a fact that these are cherubim. They're a special class of angel. Now, starting in verse 22, the platform is described. Over their heads, over the heads of these living beings, there's something like an expanse. The word expanse here is the same Hebrew word that we find back in Genesis chapter 1, where it talks about an expanse. God created an expanse. So it's a giant platform of some kind, and it's like crystal, or maybe even better yet, like ice. It's does that ring a bell? Ice, crystal. Think of Revelation. In Revelation, there's a crystal sea. There's a sea of glass in the book of Revelation. There's connections, back to Genesis, and then forward to Revelation in Ezekiel. And this is just a little taste of that. So there's this platform or expanse over the heads of the living creatures, and it apparently is held on top of their heads, or maybe better yet, with their wings. Their wings are upholding this platform. Verse 23, under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward the other. Each one also had two wings covering its body on the one side and on the other. Now in verse 24, Ezekiel begins to describe the sound he heard. So this is not just a visual picture. There's actually auditory input as well. I also heard the sound of their wings like the sound of abundant waters as they went, like the voice of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army camp. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. He actually uses three different descriptions to try to convey what it sounded like when their wings create noise when they're moving. And what are the three descriptions that he uses? What's the first one? Abundant water. So what's abundant waters? What does that mean? Like at Niagara Falls, or a giant river that's running over a rocky bed. Or think of the ocean. You ever go down to Rye Beach or over to the coast of Maine, and on the shore the waves are hitting the rocks, and you hear this noise, and it's loud noise. Or the second description is what? Like the voice of the Almighty. This is not the only place that this kind of language is used. Once again, in Revelation chapter 1, John describes the voice of Jesus Christ, the glorified Christ, in this way, voice of many waters, sound of many waters. So what does it sound like when God talks? Well, at least sometimes it sounds like Niagara Falls. Wow. Now God can speak in a whisper. Remember Elijah? A still small voice. But here, the voice of the Almighty, like abundant waters. And the third description is what there in verse 24? A tumult, like an army camp. So have you ever been to a really large gathering? When I was a kid, my dad would take us to Major League ball games. So I was back in the 1960s, I was in Yankee Stadium and Shea Stadium in New York. I've been to Tiger Stadium in Detroit. I've been to Oakland A's Stadium in Oakland, California. Some of those stadiums hold 75,000 people. And you can imagine what it's like when somebody gets a base hit and the crowd stands up and they shout. That's this noise. These living creatures, when they extend their wings and they're going to move, the noise is like an army camp, a tumult, abundant waters. And when they stop and stand still, the end of verse 24, what happens? Their wings drop. So when they stop and they're stationary, their wings droop or drop. And now all of a sudden we realize there's more to this. We've been so captivated. These creatures they're not human. They have four faces. They have wings. They have these gigantic wheels, and they move in straight lines. And the noise of their wings is, wow. But then all of a sudden, there's a voice from above the platform. What is it? There came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. And now Ezekiel realizes it's not really, the focal point is not these strange creatures and these gigantic wheels and this ice crystal platform. There's something else. Verse 26, now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli. What color is lapis lazuli? Bright blue. It's a bright blue color. It's a semi-precious gem, mined extensively in Afghanistan, other places too. But it was one of the favorite gemstones of the ancient world. Bright blue, and the throne is apparently cut out of, or is, a gigantic lapis lazuli stone. And on that which resembled a throne, remember now, he's trying to put into human language concepts that are too big to fit. Why doesn't he just say it was a throne? Why does he say it resembles a throne? It's because the reality is too big for that word. The reality of what this is that he's trying to describe is beyond human language. So you and I might call it a chair. Chair does not do it justice. We might say, oh, well, it's a really big chair. No, you haven't got it yet. It's a beautiful big chair. No, keep going. It's a throne. Well, that's the best word we have in the language. There isn't a word beyond that. But that's still not good enough. Do you see what's going on here? It resembled a throne because it's bigger, it's better, it's more beautiful, it's more majestic than that. And now he says, high up was a figure with the appearance of a man. Who's this? This is God. Either Jesus Christ or God the Father, not clear which one, but this is God sitting on his throne, and his throne is held by 4 cherubim, and it moves. It's not just stationary, on a slab of rock somewhere. His throne is angels, And in verse 27, here's how Ezekiel describes God. Then I noticed from the appearance of his loins and upwards something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. When does metal glow? How do you get metal to glow? When you heat it up in a furnace, when it is 1,000 degrees or 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, when it's steel or iron or bronze, when it's so hot that it's molten, hot glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. So from his waist up, like glowing metal, from his waist down, something like fire. Why does he say something like fire? Because he's trying to fit into human language what he saw, and it's not exactly fire. It's bigger than fire. It's better than fire. It's divine fire. But that's the best word I can come up with, he says. And there was a radiance around him. What is the radiance? Look at verse 28. Like a rainbow, it's apparently multicolored and maybe arced, maybe in a semicircle shape around him. And how does Ezekiel call this? In verse 28, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance, such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. This is the glory of the Lord. And then Ezekiel did what? And when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. He fell on his face. Can you think of other meetings between human beings and God in the Bible? John the Elder, John the Apostle, in Revelation. Remember, he was in the Spirit on the Lord's day in the Isle of Patmos, and he heard a voice behind him speaking, and he turned around and he saw somebody in a white robe and eyes and flame of fire and radiance. And what did he do? Fell at his feet like a dead man. Think of other meetings between Moses at the burning bush, and God said, take your shoes off, and he got down on his knees. Or later on, Exodus 34, Moses says, "Let me see your glory." And God says, "Well, you can't see my face, but you can go in this cave and I'll hold my hand over your face and I'll pass by and describe myself to you. And when I'm passed by, you can see my back." Or Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. What's his train? His robe. God's robe filled the temple. And what did Isaiah do? Fell on his face. And he said, "Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I come from a people of unclean lips." The common denominator is when people meet God, they fall down on their faces. They don't walk up to him and shake his hand. That doesn't happen. When people get a glimpse of who God is, they get down on the ground. Because God is so holy and so glorious and so powerful. Let me share with you some things that we can learn from Ezekiel chapter 1 that are practical, and that were practical for Ezekiel in his own life, and that can help us. Remember, the point here is to get a proper view of God, because when you're facing a crisis, the Jewish nation was facing a terrible crisis because they were about to cease to exist. They're about to go away. Ezekiel was facing a horrible, horrible crisis himself. We don't know it yet, but we're going to find out in a couple chapters and a little ways in. One of the things that God is going to say to Ezekiel is, your wife is going to die, and you're not allowed to weep. God took Ezekiel's wife because it was a lesson to the Jewish people. He is facing, personally, extremely difficult things. The nation of Israel is facing, it may not be here tomorrow. The temple of God is going to be destroyed. The most important thing is your view of God. Who is God? And notice a few things about this. God is over nature. He comes in a storm cloud. God is the one who controls nature. Psalm 97, Psalm 104, Job 38. There's a lot of passages you could go to and read to find out that God rules over nature. He is in charge. God is over angels. God is over cherubim. These incredible creatures. We have the feeling when we read Ezekiel chapter 1, these cherubim are way beyond us in intelligence, in power, in strength, in dignity. These are not limited human beings. These are angelic creatures that are wow. But they're just the chariot. They're the carriers of the platform. God is over them. And here's something else. Where does God make his appearance? See, the Jewish people had it in their minds, God is in his temple. Where's the temple again? What physical location? Where's the temple? Jerusalem, in Israel. Ezekiel is 1,000 miles away in Babylon. But the vision of God is there. God is not limited to his stone house in Jerusalem. And in fact, he makes himself known to Ezekiel among the exiles along the irrigation canal Chebar in Babylon. God is interested in, and he comes down to earth, and he intervenes in people's lives. He's concerned about what's happening with the exiles in Babylon. This amazing God, this God who is so glorious that Ezekiel can't even find the right words to use. This God who is so powerful that Ezekiel talks about glowing metal and fiery torches and these four-faced creatures. This God is concerned about individuals, about people, about us. The same God who made the heavens and the earth, the same God who is on his throne on the ice crystal platform borne by the wings of cherubim, is your heavenly Father if you have trusted in him as Savior. That same God, the same power, the same commander of the cherubim, can intervene in our lives. So it's good to think about the crisis. It's good to plan, to prepare, to say, what do we need to do? But more important than anything else is this: who's God? What is he? What's your view of God? Is he a small dignitary that lives in a stone building in Jerusalem? Is he a force of nature? Is he, a really nice grandfatherly kind of a guy? Or is he the God of heaven and earth, who commands the dawn, who controls the cherubim, who says to the north wind, blow? And this is the God that Ezekiel works for. He's the God that you and I work for. That same God. Thank you for being with us. Appreciate your attendance. Many, many things to pray for. Remember, many medical needs, meetings this week, Bible studies. Wednesday night is prayer meeting, and getting ready for the annual meeting as well. We'll keep that in your prayers. Please stand with me. We'll dismiss in prayer tonight. Father in heaven, thank you for the words of truth, for the great book of Ezekiel, for the encouragement it is to us that you, the God of heaven, have made the cherubim, these awesome creatures that are amazing and powerful and beyond our comprehension, and yet they are merely your servants. You who are so high lifted up above all things, and yet you take an interest in us, in our small affairs, in our little problems. And Father, you have seen fit to love us. What an amazing thing that is. Bless us tonight. We ask for your help in the various situations around the church family, for medical needs and other concerns, that your name might be glorified. Watch over us as we attempt by your Spirit to walk with you this week. We give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. We are dismissed.